Everything you know about the Crusades is probably wrong. We've been told it was Christian knights versus Muslim warriors, good versus evil. But there's one man who destroys that narrative. A Muslim general who shocked the medieval world by showing mercy when no one expected it. He spared lives when he had every reason not to. The question everyone's been asking for almost 1,000 years is why. His name was Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub. You know him as Saladin. This isn't just another history video about some random medieval leader. This is about a man who became a legend in both Christian and Muslim worlds. A man who was respected by his enemies more than some were respected by their own people. European kings wrote poems about him. Medieval writers called him the most chivalrous knight who ever lived, even though he was their enemy. Even Richard the Lionheart, one of the greatest warriors of the Crusades, admitted he'd never met a more honorable opponent. Saladin wasn't born into power. He wasn't some prince who inherited an army. He was a Kurdish boy from a military family who rose through the ranks because of his skills and intelligence. And when he finally got power, he changed history. It's 1187. Jerusalem has been in Christian hands for almost 90 years. The First Crusade captured it in 1099, and what happened next was one of the darkest moments in medieval history. The Crusaders didn't just take the city. They slaughtered almost everyone inside. Muslims, Jews, even some Christians who got caught in the chaos. Blood ran through the streets. Some historians say between 40,000 and 70,000 people were killed in just days. Mosques were burned. The Dome of the Rock was turned into a church. The entire Muslim and Jewish population was either killed or expelled. This wasn't just a military victory. It was a massacre, and the Muslim world never forgot. For nearly a century after that, Jerusalem remained in Crusader hands. The Kingdom of Jerusalem became one of several Crusader states in the region. The Crusaders built massive fortifications. They controlled trade routes. They married into local Christian communities. They were there to stay, but they had a problem. They were vastly outnumbered. The Christian population was always a minority surrounded by a much larger Muslim population. They survived because the Muslim world was divided. Different dynasties, different rulers, different priorities. The Fatimids in Egypt fought the Seljuks in Syria. There was no unified response until Saladin. Saladin was born around 1137 in Tikrit, which is in modern-day Iraq. His family was Kurdish, and his father and uncle were military commanders. From a young age, Saladin was trained in warfare, strategy, and Islamic law. But he wasn't just a soldier, he was educated. He studied the Quran, philosophy, and politics. This combination of military skill and intellectual depth would define his entire career. His rise to power started in Egypt. In the 1160s, the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt was falling apart. They were weak, divided, and vulnerable. Saladin went to Egypt as part of a military expedition led by his uncle. After his uncle died, Saladin, still in his early 30s, took his place as vizier of Egypt. He slowly consolidated power. He reformed the military, strengthened the economy, and built alliances. When the Fatimid Caliph died in 1171, Saladin declared Egypt would now follow Sunni Islam. This was a massive political move that shifted the entire balance of power in the region. Over the next few years, he brought more territory under his control. He took Damascus, then Aleppo, then Mosul. He wasn't just building an empire. He was unifying the Muslim world in a way it hadn't been unified in generations. And he had one clear goal: take back Jerusalem. But Saladin was smart. He knew he couldn't just attack the Crusaders head-on. He needed the right moment, the right strategy. He signed truces with some Crusader states while attacking others. He built up his army and waited for his opportunity. That opportunity came in 1187 because of one man, Reynold of Chatillon. Reynold was a Crusader lord who controlled the fortress of Karak on a major trade route between Egypt and Syria. He was brutal, reckless, and greedy. Even other crusaders thought he was dangerous. He had a habit of breaking truces and attacking Muslim caravans during times of peace. In early 1187, he attacked a large caravan traveling from Cairo to Damascus. According to some sources, it might have even included Saladin's sister. This was the final straw. Saladin declared that Reynold had broken the truce, and he called for jihad. He gathered his army and marched toward the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The two armies met at a place called the Horns of Hattin on July 4, 1187. It was a pair of hills near the Sea of Galilee, and it became the site of one of the most decisive battles of the Crusades. The Crusader army was massive. It included King Guy of Jerusalem, the Grand Masters of the Knights Templar and Knights Hospitaller, and almost every available knight in the kingdom. They brought the true cross with them. A relic they believed was a piece of the actual cross Jesus was crucified on. This wasn't just a military campaign. For them, it was a holy war. But they made a critical mistake. They marched through the desert in the middle of summer with limited water supplies. Saladin knew this. He used his light cavalry to harass them, slow them down, and cut them off from water sources. By the time the Crusaders reached Hattin, they were exhausted, dehydrated, and surrounded. Saladin ordered his archers to fire volleys of arrows into the Crusader lines. Then he set fire to the dry grass around them. The Crusaders were being attacked from all sides, choked by smoke, dying of thirst. It was a disaster. The Crusader army was almost completely destroyed. King Guy was captured. Reynold of Chatillon was captured. The true cross was captured. And here's where Saladin showed who he really was. After the battle, the prisoners were brought before him. King Guy was terrified. In that era, captured kings were often executed or held for enormous ransoms. Saladin offered Guy some water. In Arab culture, this was significant. Offering water to a prisoner meant you were offering them protection and mercy. Then Reynold was brought in. Saladin didn't offer him water. Instead, he reminded Reynold of all the truces he had broken, all the people he had killed, all the caravans he had attacked. Then Saladin executed him personally. Some sources say he beheaded him. Either way, Reynold was dead. But here's the important part. Saladin spared King Guy. He spared most of the other nobles. He didn't massacre the captured soldiers. He took them as prisoners, and many were later released or ransomed. This was already a huge contrast to what the Crusaders had done in 1099. But the real test was still to come. After Hattin, the Kingdom of Jerusalem was defenseless. Saladin's army swept through the region. They captured city after city: Acre, Jaffa, Ashkelon. And then, in September 1187, Saladin's army reached Jerusalem. Jerusalem was packed with Christian refugees who had fled from other cities. The military commander was a man named Balian of Ibelin. He had been trying to evacuate his family when the Queen of Jerusalem begged him to stay and organize the defense. He agreed but made Saladin promise to let his family leave safely. Saladin agreed. That should tell you something right there. The siege didn't last long. Saladin's army surrounded the city and began their assault. The defenders fought hard, but they didn't have enough soldiers. After less than 2 weeks, Balian asked to negotiate surrender. And this is the moment that defines Saladin's legacy. He could have done what the Crusaders did in 1099. He had every reason to. His advisors told him to. They reminded him of the massacre. They said it was justice. They said it was revenge. But Saladin refused. Instead, he agreed to let the Christians leave safely if they paid a ransom. 10 dinars for a man, 5 for a woman, 1 for a child. It wasn't cheap, but it was far better than slaughter. And for those who couldn't pay, Saladin used his own money to free thousands of them. His brother and other Muslim leaders freed thousands more. The contrast with 1099 couldn't have been clearer. When the Crusaders took Jerusalem, they killed everyone. When Saladin took it back, he let them go. Christian chroniclers couldn't believe it. They wrote about it with a mixture of relief and shame. Some called Saladin more Christian than the Christians themselves. There's a story that when Saladin entered Jerusalem, he found the Dome of the Rock, which had been turned into a church, filled with Christian religious items. He ordered it cleaned and restored, but didn't destroy anything of historical value. He allowed Christian pilgrims to continue visiting the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. He protected the Eastern Christian communities who had lived in Jerusalem long before the Crusades. Why did he do this? Some historians say it was strategy. He knew that if he massacred the Christians, it would trigger another crusade. Others say it was his personal faith. Saladin was deeply religious. He prayed 5 times a day, he fasted, he followed Islamic law strictly. An Islamic law is very clear about the treatment of prisoners. But I think it was more than that. Saladin understood that cruelty creates enemies, but mercy creates respect. Of course, Europe didn't just accept the loss of Jerusalem. News of the city's fall triggered the Third Crusade. Richard the Lionheart of England, Philip II of France, and Frederick Barbarossa of Germany all mobilized their armies. Frederick drowned on the way there, but Richard and Philip led their forces to the Holy Land. Richard was a brilliant military commander, maybe one of the best of his time. He won several battles against Saladin. He recaptured Acre and other coastal cities. But he couldn't take Jerusalem. The city was too well defended, and his supply lines were stretched thin. The two sides fought to a stalemate. And during this time, something remarkable happened. Richard and Saladin developed a mutual respect. They never met face to face, but they exchanged gifts and messages. There's a famous story that during one battle, Richard's horse was killed, and Saladin sent him 2 replacement horses because he felt it was dishonorable for a king to fight on foot. Eventually, they negotiated a treaty in 1192. Jerusalem would remain in Muslim hands, but Christian pilgrims would be allowed to visit freely. The coastal cities would be divided between them. It wasn't the outcome either side wanted, but it was a practical solution. Richard went home to England. Saladin returned to Damascus. Saladin died less than a year later, in March 1193. He was only 55 or 56 years old. And when his treasurers checked his wealth after his death, they found he had almost nothing. He had given away most of his money to charity, to free prisoners, to help the poor. He didn't leave enough to pay for his own funeral. His family had to cover the cost. So why does this story matter almost 1,000 years later? Because Saladin represents something we desperately need to remember. He was a warrior, yes. He led armies, he fought battles, he conquered cities, but he never lost his humanity. He never let war turn him into a monster. In an era defined by religious hatred, he showed respect for other faiths. In a time when massacres were common, he chose mercy. In a world where rulers hoarded wealth, he gave his away. He proved that you could be strong without being cruel, that you could win without becoming like your enemies. And here's the thing that really gets me. Saladin's enemies respected him more than many people respect their own leaders today. Christian writers in medieval Europe praised him. They wrote about his honor, his generosity, his justice. Dante, the Italian poet, even put Saladin in the first circle of hell in the Divine Comedy, which was reserved for virtuous non-Christians. That was the highest honor a medieval Christian could give to a Muslim. The story of Saladin and the Crusades isn't a simple tale of good versus evil. It's a story about how individuals make choices, even in the worst circumstances. It's about how mercy can be more powerful than violence. It's about how reputation and honor can outlast any empire. When Saladin took Jerusalem in 1187, he could have done anything. He had absolute power. He could have avenged the massacre of 1099. Instead, he chose something harder. He chose to be better than those who came before him. And that's why we're still talking about him today. Not because he won battles, though he did. Not because he built an empire, though he did that too. But because in the middle of one of the bloodiest conflicts in history, He showed that another way was possible. The Muslim general who showed mercy to the Crusaders wasn't just a historical figure. He was an example. An example that even in war, even when you have every reason to hate, even when revenge would be easy and expected, you can still choose humanity. That's the lesson of Saladin.